is up, Outlap F1 Nation? This will be season 6, episode 47 of the Outlap F1 podcast. That is what you have found. It is our 2024 Qatar GP review show. You've got Andy and I'm along with Cody tonight in a very, very cold Chicago. I have gone from the t-shirt to the hoodie because it's cold outside. But Cody, other than being cold, how you doing tonight?
Doing well. I'm in the same boat as you, man. I was just out and about, and I'm still sporting the denim jacket to stay warm in my quite cold house. But yeah, doing well. Looking very much forward to upcoming trips, and looking forward to the last little bits of the Formula One season. Still sad about it being gone for a few months after that. We've got a little bit left.
Yeah, this trip is going to be, I don't know when I'm supposed to sleep. I really don't. Between F3, F2, F1, the F2 championship going down to the wire, the Constructors Championship going down to the wire, and all sorts of stuff to be decided in the drivers, other than, of course, P1. There is so much to play for in this season that has just given it to us basically all year long. And this race was kind of sort of no exception, but we got some other stuff we got to get into about all of that. So if you have found our show, as always, welcome along. You can find us, as always, Twitter, X, whatever that platform is, the remnants of it. We still post stuff. That's where we post all of my ramblings and rantings over the course of the weekend. You can find it there. Instagram, Discord, Reddit, and, of course, here on YouTube if you happen to be seeing us in video form. At Outlap F1 Podcast is the handle for all of those places. If you enjoy what you are watching and you like what you're hearing, you can do as the kids do and smash that subscribe button, or you can leave us a like, or if you're on your favorite podcasting app, specifically Apple Podcast or Spotify, if you want to leave us a 5-star review, all of what everybody asks for people to do that. All that does helps us come up a little bit better in F1 related search results. And we would be most appreciative if you'd like to do that. You can email the show always, and we will react to them when you do. Chat now at outlapf1.com. We'll take you there. Outlap F1 Nation continuing to support the show. We are very, very, very much grateful. Thank you so much to Dean Warwick, Yuri Dolchester, Paul Weaver, Quentin Warden, Kevin Kelly, Regan Stanzik, Timothy Brown, and of course, Jonathan Scott. If you'd like to become a member of that hashtag Outlap F1 Nation and get your name read at the beginning of every episode, like these fine folks do, you visit our anchor page, $1, $5. All of that goes into updating current equipment or keeping the equipment we have relevant, just so we can continue to bring content to you as we like to do. And we would be appreciative if you'd like to help us to support us in that endeavor. Last thing before we hop in to a very packed agenda, you can get 20% off. As we all know, Christmas is coming. This is Cyber Monday when we are recording tonight. So all of the stuff is marked off, but you can also get a better deal, 20% off and free shipping with the good folks at Manscaped. Use our code OUTLAP, that's OUTLAP, enter it at checkout and get the good deal there. All right, the particulars are now quickly out of the way. Cody, it is time to start with the headline of the day. What you got?
I'll take penalty shit shows for 500, Alex. Yeah, that was the name of the game this weekend. Was one nasty penalty after another. Some of them just made no sense. Some of the conditions on track took way too long to sort out. Some penalties seemed overly harsh. It was nuts. The FIA was not having a good run of it this weekend, and we're going to call them out for it.
Yeah, my headline is very much aligned with yours, and mine is the best thing you can say about those who choose to officiate. And a lot of people, I know a lot of people do that kind of almost on a voluntary basis, is that the best thing you can say is that, well, guess what? When we don't say anything about them, because that means they did their job and they all went home and we all just moved on from whatever it is that they did. When instead you have to discuss them, and we're going to discuss a lot of this, it feels kind of at length, it means as an official, you have most likely failed. So when you are in the spotlight as much as you are, in this case, it probably didn't go well for you. And that's kind of my thought on what we're going to talk about for a good chunk of this review. But it starts all the way back on the Friday early, I guess, morning or late morning. It's actually a really nice time to actually watch some sprint qualifying. But we got that, and that session saw. All right, going out in P20. That was Franco Colapinto in the Williams. P19 was Zhao Guan Yu. Bad start to the weekend. It would get better for the Kick Sauber boys. I promise. Hang with us. P18, Esteban Ocon. P17 was Yuki Tsunoda. P16, oh my God, we're having to say this again. Out in Q1, yet again, Sergio Checo Perez. Someone make the pain stop. P15 was Kevin Magnussen. P14, Lance Stroll. P13, good form here early for the other Kick Sauber of Valtteri Bottas. He definitely ate his U.S. version of Wheaties or whatever it was. So good showing there. P12 was Alex Albon. P11, Fernando Alonso. The top 10 from 10 to 1. P10, showing well early, Liam Lawson in the V-Carb. P9, Nico Hulkenberg in the Haas as that fight for P6 kicks off in earnest. P8, Pierre Gasly. P7, struggling a little bit, but still pretty respectable here, Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes. P6, bit of a surprise to be struggling early, Max Verstappen in the Red Bull, but we will talk about him later. His weekend would definitely get better. P5 was Charles Leclerc. P4, Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. P3.
Carlos Sainz for P4.
Oh, right? I'm sorry. P4 was Carlos Sainz doing too many things at once. P3 was Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. P2 was George Russell in the Mercedes. And P1, setting the pace early, Lando Norris in the McLaren, making a mockery of our predicted lap times. Oh my God. 121.012, the pole time. All right, Cody, big thoughts here in the sprint shootout from Friday.
I was still wondering if Finnish Wheaties are a thing, but I think the big story from the beginning of the weekend here is that McLaren did what we expected them to do and came back from Las Vegas with a vengeance. They looked very strong here in the beginning of the weekend. In fact, Mercedes, at least George Russell, still looked very strong as well. It was very close between the top three in qualifying, but you did have McLaren occupying two of those top three spots, and George Russell splitting them down the middle. It did also look pretty concerning for Max Verstappen because he was all the way down in sixth place, which is pretty rare occurrence for him to be that far back despite this Red Bull falling off a little bit. And then, we saw Valtteri Bottas qualify what we figure is way better than what the Kick Sauber has had to offer in the past. But other than that, it seemed to be pretty much the usual running. I guess you could tip your cap to Pierre Gasly for making it all the way up to eighth place.
Yeah, I mean that was probably the good thing, but he was shadowed by their rival for P6 here, Nico Hulkenberg. But yeah, I mean early on, I think McLaren's on good form. Piastri struggling a little bit in the practices, but then in the one practice, but did manage to pull it together for the qualifying. Lando, obviously, the little bit quicker of the two. And George Russell, I thought, the pleasant surprise. If you were looking for a pleasant surprise, Mercedes, cool temperatures, definitely suiting that car at least early. All right, so we will move into the sprint, and we'll take you just kind of through the order of the sprint finish. So P20, oh boy, we have to talk about him. That was Sergio Checo Perez in the adventure in the pit lane. P19 was Zhao Guan Yu. I promise you, Kick Sauber fans, it's going to get better. P18 was Franco Colapinto. P17, Yuki Tsunoda. P16, Liam Lawson. P15, Alex Albon. P14, Esteban Ocon. P13, Lance Stroll. P12, Valtteri Bottas. P11 was Fernando Alonso. P10, Kevin Magnussen, and P9, just missing out on points, was Pierre Gasly. Your points finishers in the sprint. P8, Max Verstappen. This was probably a shocker for me that he was that far down. P7, Nico Hulkenberg, 2 big points for Haas early. P6, Lewis Hamilton. P5 was Charles Leclerc. P4 was Carlos Sainz. P3 was George Russell. P2, we're going to talk about this, was Lando Norris. Although he wasn't there for very long, but P1, Oscar Piastri does take the sprint at the end. Early indications really good for McLaren here. They maximize their points on the sprint. But that wasn't the only story. Cody, what'd you see kind of right at the end there? It got a little more interesting than we all thought.
Yes, this sprint race was not doing much to keep me awake. It was very early here in the middle of the U.S., and I was kind of fading in and out as I was trying to keep up with it, thinking it was kind of boring, and then right at the end, it woke me back up at the start when Lando Norris gave away the win to his teammate Oscar Piastri at the very end in the last turn. Got to imagine that it's repaying Oscar Piastri for handing Lando the sprint win in Brazil. That one was really Oscar's to lose, and they did the position switch right at the end to try to keep Lando in the Drivers' Championship hunt. Now that is, no longer a possibility, it appears that Lando wanted to pay that sprint win back to him, which I think is a pretty noble thing to do, especially since, I think it's fair. And since they're not in the hunt for the drivers anymore, I don't think there's really any harm done because they still got the 1-2 finish. The team did say on the radio that they were happy with the original finishing position and that they wanted to finish 1-2 with Lando in front. But it looks like Lando decided to take that into his own hands and give the win to Oscar anyway, which, again, I think is pretty noble. What did you think of it from your... Yeah.
From my perspective, I mean, when I saw it on timing, and again, that's usually the first thing I saw, I thought maybe something happened to the car right at the end because all of a sudden there's Piastri coming home in the first position. Like he's in the third sector. I'm like, what the hell could have possibly happened? But then he gets across the line. So I'm like, okay, even if the engine died, he still managed to get P2. And then you see it, and then you realize exactly what had happened, that he slowed down. He did, apparently, as it's kind of played out, they had talked about doing this if the conditions warranted it. The team knew that it was a possibility of it happening, and they thought that the margin to Russell was, if anything, too close to try to pull that off. Lando obviously felt differently, and at least in the first blush, I said, you know what? That's good. That's telling the team, look, you can trust us. It's the same argument that I had in Brazil when they waited so long to do the switch, when everybody knew that they were going to do the switch and that the switch is something that needed to happen. Trust the drivers. They know the margin a lot better even sometimes than the team does at that point. And if they say they're going to do something, trust them to enable them to pull it off. And they pulled it off, and nothing else bad happened. Nothing weird happened, and everybody was okay in the end. So if that puts the thing in the team that, hey, we can let our drivers do the things that they are going to go do anyway, that's a good thing, because part of it, I think, is, especially when it comes to the drivers, they've been way too conservative. And if they want to compete for that next year, and it certainly looks like they're going to have the car for it, at least early indications are, they have to get a little more aggressive, because Max is not going to let that thing go by any stretch of the imagination, as we have seen before and saw even a little bit here as well. All right, so first part of the weekend, at least in my eyes, went very much according to plan. We now will move into the full quali session, which saw, re-rack this here. There we go. All right, P20, going out in the main qualifying, that was Esteban Ocon in the Alpine. P19 was Franco Colapinto. P18, Nico Hulkenberg. P17, Liam Lawson, not able to repeat the good form from the sprint shootout. And P16 was Alex Albon in the Williams. P15 was Lance Stroll. P14, Yuki Tsunoda. P13, there they are again, the Kick Sauber. And P12, the other Kick Sauber. Look at that, Zhao Guanyu. I told you things were getting better for the Kick Sauber boys. P11 was Pierre Gasly. P10, Kevin Magnussen. P9, better showing here, at least for now, Sergio Checo Perez. P8 was Fernando Alonso. P7, Carlos Sainz. That was a bit of a shocker, to me at least. P6, Lewis Hamilton. P5 was Charles Leclerc. P4 and P3 saw the two McLarens in Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, respectively. P2 was George Russell. And talk about a rally. I don't know what the setup was between the sprint and the qualifying, but whatever they did, boy, did it work. Max Verstappen coming out of nowhere, a 120.520 to storm to the pole. Cody, I think I know where you're going to start with the qualifying.
Yes, I don't know what kind of like jet fuel they put in the Red Bull or what they did. I got a sneaking suspicion it had to do with Sergio Perez in the sprint race, and we didn't really touch on it before that he did finish in last and pretty much went around the whole sprint in last. I suspect Red Bull was testing out setup changes on his car in preparation for figuring out what they wanted to do for the main race qualifying. And if that's what they were trying to do, they definitely accomplished it because both Max and Sergio Perez looked much better in the main race qualifying. I mean, hell, Perez made it into Q3. How often does that happen these days? But yeah, Max coming away with the pole, even though the margins were quite small, was very impressive. Made me excited for the main race. I'd be excited no matter what, but I am a bit of a Max fanboy. So it was cool to see him back at the front, even though we'll get into it in a minute. And didn't end up actually being in the pole slot, but yeah, George Russell continued to look very strong. The McLarens did slump back just a little bit. I mean, they're still only a couple tenths off of Max Verstappen's pole time, so really not doing too bad. But it did look at this point after McLaren's strong sprint result and their strong qualifying result compared to Ferrari, they were going to probably more or less seal away the Constructors' Championship this weekend. We'll get into that didn't quite go as planned. But
That's
yeah, good to see Max. Yes.
And then the plan kind of went off the rails just a little bit, and we'll talk about that and kind of what happened. Foreshadowing: if you haven't watched the race, I would expect go watch the race before. Like, stop this now and go watch the race, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. But yeah, I mean, at this point, at least from where I was like, okay, yeah, P4 and P3, that's perfectly respectable. There's nothing wrong there. I mean, George just ekes it out a little bit, maybe a couple tenths. What I noticed, at least on the McLaren car in qualifying pace, and even in the sprint shootout where they took really good positions, and Lando even took the pole, the car seemed very snappy, definitely on the edge, and they kept dialing. It seemed more on the edge. It wasn't a very smooth, easy as you like lap. You had to definitely work it to try to eke out the lap time, and whether or not that was suiting the McLaren drivers or not, they were able to obviously manage it. But it looked like because of that, they kind of peaked on their overall pace a little bit earlier than some of these other guys who had probably a little bit more extra margin, to try to give the lap. And again, whatever they threw at the Red Bull for Max's case, somebody ought to get some kind of a medal for, because he looked absolutely nowhere in the sprint. He was not happy. And then whether it's a combination of either Dremel Tool 2.0, which I don't think happened, I didn't see that, but or a smart decision to say, well, Checo, you can't get out of Q1. Guess what? You just became the test dummy. And they basically rolled him out there and said, you're just going to run all these different configurations. So I don't know if they changed. I think they maybe even changed his wing a couple times in the sprint. It was kind of bordering almost on stupidity. He gets passed, I think, even in the pit lane by Franco Colapinto when the light turned green, as if like, hey, you can, go now. And he just didn't. So for whatever reason, Sergio turned into the test dummy, and it definitely worked out in Max's favor, because that from P6 in qualifying in the sprint shootout to P1, and just the pace he found was just tremendous.
Yes, but he did not get to revel in his pole position for very long, because we do have one little bit to get into before we get to the race. And that was...
you mean the 3-hour adjudication of one of the dumbest things I've ever seen?
Yep,
okay.
That is exactly what.
So let's do this, and let's do this right. So I believe it was in Q3. It was on. Was it even on the final run, or was it on even the first run?
I think it was. I'm not 100% sure, but I do believe it was going in preparation for the last run. And it does need to be noted, which you're probably going to note, that both of these drivers involved were not on a fast lap at this point.
Yeah, they are not on flying laps. So, and we've had this issue. This has been an issue in qualifying in Formula One for years now, where we've shifted where we let everybody kind of gaggle. Years past, before we had any sort of a delta time or anything like that, you used to see everybody would stop and they would form a line basically in sector 3, and then each car would basically kind of fire off and start their last lap. They'd kind of count to 7, and then the next car would go, and count to 7, and then the next car would go. And then you ended up getting the farce, I think it was 2020 Monza, where everybody shadow boxed themselves so badly in the third sector that only Carlos Sainz makes the flag and gets to go set his last lap, and it didn't matter because he didn't have a slipstream at that point. So you ended up with that, and then what they did was they said, well, okay, we're going to institute this where once you are out of the pit lane, and again, you have to remember where the pit lane is. The pit lane is all the way at the end at the safety car line, not where they first come out, not where the barrier is necessarily. You have a certain amount of delta that you're supposed to be able to keep between from that line all the way to when you start your flying lap. And the rule has gotten, I mean, it's a rule that's on the books, but it is not enforced very heavily because more often than not, what you have is you have certain cars going around. Some cars are doing flying laps. Some cars are doing other things. And if a car is doing a flying lap, you don't want to get charged with impeding. So you're going to slow down and get the heck out of the guy's way and let the flying lap car go by. And if they cite you for that, you go into the steward's room and you say, hey, look, I slowed down. They look at the telemetry. They type up this lovely little document, and it's a giant nothing burger. That's what comes out of usually the enforcement of this rule. So in Q3, they're both out on preparatory laps. Max, I think, the other instance with this was because of the lack of tire degradation at this particular circuit, you were getting almost better lap times on your second run on the same tire. Also something you usually don't really ever see. Normally you see an out lap, a flying lap, they come in, they get those tires off, they put on a new set, and then they go out and do that same thing again. In this case, Max had set a flying lap. He was slowing down. He was doing almost a double cool. George Russell had also completed a flying lap, so he was what they would call in phase with Max at that point. And I think the car that ends up going past both of them is Fernando Alonso. So now Max is kind of a bit of a quandary because Fernando Alonso, and now they're all coming into sector 3. So you got to remember that this is where the pinch point always is, no matter how you get there. Sometimes you still end up with this. So Max is trying to let Fernando start his lap to build that 7-second gap. So he's got clean air to go do his lap. And he's going pretty slow. Let's be honest. The telemetry says he's pretty slow. Meanwhile, George Russell is coming out and he's trying to get that same gap. And Alonso had passed both of them. And for whatever reason, whether George was trying to get extra temperature in his tire or whatever he was doing, he speeds up, which is not what you would expect to see on an outlap, but it's what he did. He sped up and got kind of almost right behind Max's gearbox, forcing himself to jink around and make kind of a maneuver. And then he goes off and he just passed Max and goes and starts his flying lap. And then he gets on the radio and goes, oh my God, that was so dangerous from Max Verstappen. And okay, fine. George goes and does his lap and gets P2. And then Max goes out and does his lap and takes P1. And you think there's nothing more of it, except now, because now the backdrop of all of this is we have new race director. We have only in his second race, and we have F1 drivers kind of doing some, I guess what the British people would call argy-bargy between the laps here. It's not exactly clean cut. And so what ends up happening is that incident gets noted. It looked like, if you look at it in real speed, it almost looked like it was impeding, and then you realize, well, wait a minute, both of these guys are not on flying laps. And for the next 3 hours and 25 minutes between when they posted the provisional grid classification, which is where everybody finished on the road, I don't know what happened in the stewards room. Something weird happened because you could just from my own chair, I started to get more nervous. I'm like, if it's not coming out right away, something's up. I don't know what, but something's up, and Max is going to get something. And what they ended up giving him was a grid drop. Now, the normal grid drop for impeding is 3 places. But instead of doing the 3 places, they noted that it was a air quote unusual circumstance, and instead decided to give him a 1-place grid drop for the impeding of George Russell, or not even impeding, for not making the safety car delta time. That was the actual adjudication of this thing. And it took them 3 hours and 30 minutes to come up with a 1-place grid drop, which doesn't make any sense because it didn't affect Max's lap. It didn't affect George's lap. Didn't affect anybody. This, to me, was the biggest 3.5-hour nothing burger that I've had to sit and refresh the FIA website for that I can remember in recent memory. I'm literally sitting here going, okay, I got done with one college football game and halfway through another one after the qualifying ended before I got this result. And then, Cody, I'll let you take it from here. The reaction.
Yeah, it was a crock of crap, in my opinion. So the big thing for me was, I guess if you want to look at like the hard numbers, if he didn't make the delta time, he didn't make the delta time. But as you also said, they haven't really been strictly enforcing that. And yeah, you look at the car camera, the driver's view camera, and you see that George Russell comes up on Max pretty quickly, and Max was on the racing line. So normally that would be where you'd look to impeding. Someone's on the racing line when someone else should be having that luxury, until you remember that, yeah, George wasn't on a flying lap. So he's not really any more entitled to being on the racing line than Max is. And yeah, Max is slowing down because he's trying to make sure he's got the space for his run. I don't see why George just couldn't have gone around him a little earlier and avoided this whole kerfuffle. But yeah, he makes a bigger stink out of it than it should have been over the radio. You see drivers do that all the time, blowing something out of proportion, trying to see what's going to stick. And this one did end up sticking, which I found to be extremely frustrating, because even the stewards noted that, yeah, this isn't really like a normal circumstance, maybe not a normal circumstance where we would, give out a penalty. And then they give out the teeniest, tiniest, stupid penalty, a 1-place grid drop. Like, at that point, like, why even bother? Like, it's an almost a nothing penalty. If anything, you're giving Max the advantage because now he's going to have the inside line going into the first turn. But it does officially take away his pole, which I think is kind of more.
Actually, no, it doesn't.
It doesn't. Okay.
He wins the pole, but he does not start in P1.
Okay.
So he still got the wheel trophy.
Okay, that's
and all that.
But I guess a lot of it came down to that Max and George went to, or they were summoned to the stewards about this, and at least from Max's perspective, it was quite bullshitty, because apparently George went full on, like, he deserves the penalty for this, and that. Whereas from Max's perspective, he thought they were going to go into this and just be like, yeah, it really wasn't a big deal. But yeah, I guess George argued very strongly that it should be a penalty, and he ended up getting what he wanted out of it. But yeah, the fact that neither one of them was on a flying lap, so it really shouldn't be impeding. So at that point, you're looking for, what can we throw at him? Oh, we can throw this like loosely enforced delta maintenance time thing at him. And, oh, well, we can't really make it a full impeding penalty, so we'll just make it impeding light, to the point where it doesn't even make a difference. It just was really stupid.
Yeah, no, I mean, and this goes, I've said this many times. I said, be very leery of when things go into that room because you have sometimes no idea what is going to come out of when decisions end up in that room. And, apparently this whole George thing, and look, I'm going to start this by saying, first of all, I really like George. I think he's a pretty good guy. He's got his GPDA responsibilities. I don't know why they flung that at like a 19-year-old when they first made him the chairman, but they did. And I don't know if he was trying to put his GPDA hat and make an argument, but he's also the kid. And in any school situation, you have this kid. He's always going to be there. He's the kid that will point at you when you do anything wrong and do what I call the gear changes. Here, literally, will go, oh, until he gets the attention of somebody bigger than him to, have you get looked at. And that's what this kind of felt like, if I'm really being honest about it. They're not on flying laps. And again, we've gone through this Delta time thing, and 90% of the time it's noted. There's no further action. We reviewed telemetry and everything. I guess the penalty is Max got caught trying to cool off his tires. And even that doesn't seem to make sense. And I guess if you're going to go cool off your tires, you should do it off the racing line. Fine. But the knock-on effect of this is, to me, the bigger issue, because you're going to see somebody else, maybe even Max, try to game this, where now you're going to have people on slow laps that have nothing to do with anything, and you're going to have cars dive bombing their gearboxes going, that's the Max Verstappen rule. You got to give another one place drop here so I can get above him. Like, the door that this opens up is 10 times worse than the door that you think you're shutting by doing this. It should have been a fine. That, to me, would have been it. Maybe even make it an expensive fine. Make it 100,000 euros. I don't care. But that's as far as it should have gone. A fine or a reprimand. That's all it should have been. That's how I saw it when I saw it live. I said, all right, he's going to get a reprimand. Fine. Don't do that again. That should have been the end of it. But when you go into that room and you start to make shit up, that's a problem. It's a problem, and we're not done talking about making shit up. Let's put it that way. All right. We're going to actually take a quick break here. We're going to stop because we're going to get into the main race. I do actually want to cut up the video portion of this as well. So come on back. We're going to hop into the main race, and then we will talk about where the points shake out after this. We'll open it up to your takes on what you saw in the fan email segment. We've got some bombs in here. This one's going to be pretty good, so you won't want to miss that. We'll hand out our awards, and if you think we were done handing out bombs ourselves, we're not done by any stretch. We will talk about predictions. One of us had a pretty good weekend. One of us didn't. We'll talk about that in a little bit, and then we will set the stage for, I guess, the constructor showdown in Abu Dhabi. So come on back. We'll get into it.